Summer, 1852, Beaumont County, Mississippi. Colonel Archibald Whitmore III, and yes, the third is important to him, has a problem. 7 of his enslaved workers have escaped in the last 3 months. 7. That's more people than attend his wife's dinner parties, and she invites everyone. This made Colonel Whitmore very angry. So Colonel Whitmore does what any reasonable, totally not panicking plantation owner would do. He builds a fence, but not just any fence. The tallest, thickest, most aggressively over-engineered fence the county has ever seen. 12 feet of solid pine, reinforced with iron brackets, topped with pointed stakes, with torches mounted along the perimeter. The man basically built a medieval castle wall around a cotton farm. Total cost, $4,200. In 1852 money, that's the price of a very nice house today. His neighbors are impressed. The local newspaper runs a small piece about it. Colonel Whitmore sleeps peacefully for the first time in months. That peace lasts exactly 6 days. Because by the end of that week, 14 enslaved men and women have escaped his plantation. Not over the fence, not through the fence. Under it. They dug. Some went through the creek bed under the east side. Others found soft ground near the stables. One group crawled through a drainage ditch Whitmore didn't even know existed on his own property. 14 people looked at the tallest fence in the county and collectively decided, that's cute. This made Colonel Whitmore even angrier. Significantly angrier. And that, right there, is the entire story of American slavery's security apparatus in one image. They kept building bigger walls, and people kept finding ways through, over, under, and around them. Every single time. This is that story. Let's talk about the single most delusional aspect of American slavery. And there are a lot of candidates, but this one takes the trophy, the podium, and the whole award ceremony. Slaveholders genuinely, with their whole chest, believed that enslaved people were content. Happy even. They'd write letters saying things like, our Negroes are well cared for and grateful for the structure we provide. Structure. They called it structure. The way a kidnapper calls a basement a guest room. But here's the thing about people you insist are happy. Happy people don't run away. Your dog doesn't escape the yard if you're treating him well. Your employees don't quit at midnight and sprint through the forest if the job's great. And yet by the 1850s, an estimated 1,000 enslaved people were escaping per year. 1,000. Every year. So either the slaveholders were catastrophically wrong about the happy thing, or they had the worst luck in the entire history of human resource management. If you're running a business, and that is exactly how they saw it, and your workforce keeps sprinting into the woods at 2 in the morning, you don't have a loyalty problem. You have a, you're a monster, and everyone knows it problem. But admitting that would require self-reflection. And self-reflection was not exactly the antebellum South's strong suit. Their strong suit was cotton. And denial. Mostly denial. So instead of asking, hey, maybe we shouldn't own people, they asked a much more practical question. How do we keep them from leaving? And the answer to that question created one of the most absurd and most expensive security industries in human history. First came the slave patrols. Starting in the early 1700s, southern colonies organized armed white men whose entire job was to ride around at night looking for black people who weren't where they were supposed to be. The enslaved community called them patty rollers. Think of them as the world's worst neighborhood watch. Armed, on horseback, drunk half the time, and legally allowed to whip anyone they caught. Real upstanding community service. By the 1830s, it was fully government-funded. South Carolina alone spent more on slave patrols than on its entire public education system. More on catching people than teaching people, and then they wondered why the world thought they were backwards. Then came the pass system. Every enslaved person who moved anywhere, from one plantation to another, to town, to the next field over, needed a written pass from their owner. No pass meant a beating. Or worse. The problem? Enslaved people started forging passes. Beautifully. meticulously forged passes that would make a modern counterfeiter weep. Some couldn't read or write, but memorized their master's handwriting, stroke by stroke. Others had literate allies who crafted documents so convincing that patrols waved them through without a second look. So the slaveholders upgraded again. Dogs. Not friendly dogs. Not who's a good boy dogs. Purpose-bred tracking hounds trained to follow human scent for miles and not stop until they found you. These dogs cost as much as a horse, and their owners rented them out for $5 to $20 per chase. Catching freedom had become a gig economy. 300 years before Uber, the South invented freelance manhunting. 5 stars. Would hunt again. But the enslaved community adapted. Again. They learned that wading through water broke the scent trail. That rubbing onions, pepper, or turpentine on their feet confused the dogs. That traveling during rainstorms made tracking impossible. For every lock they found a key. For every wall, a door. For every dog, a creek. And the slaveholders just kept spending. More patrols. More dogs. More fences. More guards. A large plantation security budget in the 1850s could rival a small military installation. This made the slaveholders very angry. So they spent more money, which didn't work, which made them angrier, which made them spend more money. It was a beautiful cycle. Meanwhile, someone somewhere was quietly crawling through another ditch. Now, some people didn't just escape slavery, they escaped with style. And their stories are so outrageous that if you put them in a movie, test audiences would say, "Come on, that's unrealistic." But they happened. Every one of them. Henry Box Brown, the man who mailed himself to freedom, 1849. Henry Brown was enslaved in Richmond, Virginia. One day, his wife and children were sold to a different owner and shipped to North Carolina. Just like that. No warning. No goodbye. Henry had officially had enough. So he came up with a plan that can only be described as brilliantly, magnificently, insane. He had a friend build a wooden crate. 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, 2.5 feet deep. The size of a large suitcase. Then Henry, a full-grown man, folded himself inside. His allies nailed it shut, stamped it dry goods, and shipped it through the United States Postal Service. From Richmond to Philadelphia. 250 miles. He was in that box for 27 hours. Wagon. Railroad car. Steamboat. Another train. Another wagon. At one point, the handlers flipped the crate upside down. This side up meant nothing to these gentlemen. And Henry spent hours standing on his head, blood pooling in his brain, seriously reconsidering every decision that led to this moment. But when that crate finally arrived in Philadelphia and abolitionists pried open the lid, Henry Brown stood up, alive, sweating, and somehow in one piece, and reportedly said, "How do you do, gentlemen? How do you do, gentlemen?" After 27 hours folded inside a wooden box, shipped like a piece of furniture. The man's first instinct was good manners. From that day forward, he was known as Henry Box Brown. And honestly, he earned that middle name more than anyone has earned anything. Ellen and William Craft, the couple who played the system, 1848. Ellen Craft was light-skinned enough to pass as white. Her husband William was not. Together, they designed an escape that required more acting talent than most Hollywood careers. Ellen disguised herself as a young, wealthy, white male slaveholder. Top hat, green spectacles, a sling on her right arm so nobody would ask her to write anything. Bandages around her face for a fake toothache conveniently muffled her voice. William played the role of her loyal enslaved servant. Then they traveled openly. Broad daylight, public trains, hotel restaurants, first-class waiting rooms. For 4 days, they moved through the heart of the slaveholding South, chatting with slaveholders who had no idea they were talking to an enslaved woman in a top hat. At one point, a slave trader tried to purchase William from Mr. Johnson. That was Ellen's alias. Ellen, fully in character, politely declined the offer. Another slaveholder on the train warned Mr. Johnson not to treat his slave too kindly. "You'll spoil them," he said. Ellen nodded sympathetically. They made it to Philadelphia, then Boston, then England, because even the free North wasn't safe. We'll get to that. Robert Smalls, the man who stole a warship. 1862. This one is, without question, the most audacious escape in American history. Nothing else is even close. Robert Smalls was enslaved as a wheelman on the CSS Planter, a Confederate military ship in Charleston Harbor. He knew the vessel inside and out. Every signal code. Every checkpoint. On the night of May 13, 1862, the white officers left to spend the night on shore. Against regulations, but they did it regularly. Apparently, even Confederates had a work-life balance. This would turn out to be, let's say, a significant workplace policy failure. Robert Smalls fired up the engines. He picked up his family and 12 other enslaved people. 16 souls. Then he steered the CSS Planter, a fully armed Confederate vessel, out of Charleston Harbor. 5 Confederate checkpoints. At each one, correct signal codes. In the pre-dawn darkness, wearing the captain's straw hat, nobody questioned it. At Fort Sumter, the last checkpoint, a sentry almost opened fire. The ship was moving slower than expected. The guard hesitated. Smalls gave the signal at the last possible moment. The cannon didn't fire. He sailed past Fort Sumter, raised a white bedsheet, and surrendered the ship. Weapons, cargo, Confederate code books and all, to the United States Navy. Congress awarded him a cash prize. He became a Union Navy captain. After the war, he was elected to Congress, where he served 5 terms. From enslaved man to congressman. If that's not the ultimate refutation of everything the South claimed to believe, nothing is. You cannot, absolutely cannot, tell this story without Harriet Tubman. Born Araminta Ross around 1822 in Maryland, Harriet was enslaved from birth. As a teenager, an overseer threw a 2-pound iron weight at another enslaved person. It hit Harriet instead. Traumatic brain injury, headaches and seizures for the rest of her life. Property doesn't get health care. It gets replaced. In 1849, Harriet escaped. She traveled nearly 90 miles on foot at night, alone, navigating by the North Star until she crossed into Pennsylvania. And here's where her story goes from remarkable to legendary. Because most people, after escaping the most brutal institution in American history, would say, "I'm free. I survived. I'm never going back." Harriet Tubman's response to freedom was, "Cool, I'm going back." And she did. 13 times. Over 11 years, she returned 13 times and personally led around 70 people to freedom. Men, women, children, elderly, she brought them all out. Let's put that in perspective. The slaveholding South, with its patrols, dogs, fences, bounty hunters, and million-dollar security infrastructure, could not catch a 5-foot-tall woman who kept coming back 13 times. She traveled at night, moved in winter for longer darkness, used rivers to break scent trails, and relied on safe houses. She also carried a revolver, not just for slave catchers. Harriet had a policy. Once you start, you finish. Turning back meant risking everyone. So if someone got scared and wanted to quit, Harriet would produce the revolver. You'll be free, or you'll die free. But you will not go back. Motivational speaking was built different in the 1850s. The bounty on her head reached $40,000. Over $1 million today. Professional slave catchers dreamed of bringing her in. None of them ever did. Not once. Not even close. Years later, she said, "I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." A covert paramilitary extraction operation. On foot, in enemy territory, for over a decade. With a perfect record. There are special forces units today with worse track records. During the Civil War, by the way, she became the first woman in American history to lead an armed military raid. The Combahee River Raid of 1863 liberated over 700 enslaved people in a single night. But sure, tell us more about that fence, Colonel Whitmore. Speaking of the Underground Railroad, let's clear something up. It wasn't underground, and it wasn't a railroad. Terrible name. Fantastic operation. It was a decentralized network of secret routes, safe houses, and very brave people stretching from the deep south all the way to Canada. They used railroad lingo as code. Safe houses were stations, guides were conductors, escaped people were passengers. It was basically a 19th century spy network, except run by church ladies and Quakers, which, honestly, made it even more effective. The genius was in the design. No single person knew the entire network. You knew your station, and maybe the next one. That's it. If you were captured, you couldn't betray what you didn't know. The slaveholders were trying to crack a network that had no center, no headquarters, no org chart. It was like trying to punch fog. This made them very, very angry. And the people involved? Thousands. Free black communities sheltering fugitives at enormous risk. Quaker families willing to go to prison. Former enslaved people who came back to guide others out. Sailors hiding people in cargo holds. Farmers building false walls in basements. Songs carried hidden escape instructions. Follow the drinking gourd wasn't just a spiritual. It was a GPS set to music. The drinking gourd was the Big Dipper, pointing to the North Star. The verses described actual landmarks along real escape routes. Imagine Google Maps, but you had to sing it, and if anyone caught you using it, they'd kill you. The slaveholders knew the railroad existed. They were furious. They just couldn't stop it. Because you can't dismantle a network built on trust when your entire system is built on fear. Between 1810 and 1865, an estimated 100,000 people escaped through it. 100,000. The slaveholders spent millions trying to stop it, and the railroad just kept running. Because here's what no amount of money could fix. You can build a fence around a plantation. You can put dogs on a trail. You can arm patrols and post rewards. But you cannot build a fence around human compassion. You can't put a bounty on solidarity. And it turns out, a lot more people thought slavery was wrong than the slaveholders wanted to believe. Well, they tried to fix that too. And it did not go the way they planned. By 1850, the Southern slaveholding class was at the end of its collective rope. Enslaved people were escaping in record numbers. Northern states were actively unhelpful. Some had passed laws forbidding their officials from cooperating with slave catchers. The South, we are losing our property, and the North is letting it happen. The North, that sounds like a you problem. This made the South very angry. So the South used its political leverage. They controlled the Senate, dominated the Supreme Court, to push through the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Any federal marshal who refused to capture an alleged runaway fined $1,000, $35,000 today. Any citizen who helped a fugitive, food, shelter, even pointing the wrong direction, $1,000 fine and 6 months in prison. Accused fugitives had no right to a jury trial. They could not testify on their own behalf. A single sworn affidavit from a slaveholder was enough to have a person seized and dragged back to the South. And here's the really sinister part. The federal commissioners who decided these cases received $10 for every ruling in favor of the slaveholder and $5 for every ruling in favor of the accused. The system literally paid double for the correct answer. Justice had a price tag, and it was $5. The South expected this to solve everything. The ultimate security upgrade. The federal government itself would now enforce the return of escaped people. Problem solved. Case closed. Fence upgraded. Colonel Whitmore would have loved this. What actually happened was the most spectacular political backfire in American history. Northerners who had been indifferent to slavery suddenly watched people grabbed off their own streets and shipped south without trial. People they knew. Neighbors. Churchgoers. Some weren't even escapees. Freeborn citizens with the wrong skin color and no way to prove it in a system designed to not believe them. The backlash was immediate and volcanic. Northern states passed personal liberty laws to undermine it. Mobs stormed courthouses. In Boston, abolitionists broke Shadrach Minkins out of a federal courtroom and smuggled him to Canada before the ink dried. Slave catchers were chased out of northern towns. Some got tarred and feathered, which for the record is exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. The abolitionist movement, which had been fringe, something most white Northerners rolled their eyes at, went mainstream overnight. Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, largely in response to the Fugitive Slave Act. It became the best-selling novel of the entire 19th century. When Abraham Lincoln reportedly met Stowe years later, he allegedly said, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." The Fugitive Slave Act was supposed to be the South's ultimate fence. Bigger than Whitmore's, the one nobody could get under. Instead, it was the alarm that woke the entire country up. Turns out, the fastest way to create enemies is to force everyone to become your accomplice. The South had done the one thing Colonel Whitmore's fence couldn't. It united the opposition. So, let's run the numbers on how well the South's grand containment strategy actually worked. Total spent on patrols, fencing, dogs, bounty hunters, and security between 1800 and 1860, hundreds of millions of dollars. A staggering investment. Total escape to the north or Canada, conservatively 100,000 through the Underground Railroad alone, plus tens of thousands more through independent escapes and flight to Mexico. Total number of times Harriet Tubman was caught. 0. Not even a close call. Total effectiveness of the tallest fence in Beaumont County, approximately, hilariously, none. The math was never going to work. Every dollar spent on patrols proved the system required violence. Every fence was a confession that people didn't want to be there. Every tracking dog was a receipt against the myth of the contented slave. The slaveholders told themselves a story, told it to each other, to their children, to Congress. This is natural, ordained by God, permanent. And every single escape was proof that the story was a lie. Not a philosophical argument, not an abolitionist editorial, not a moral lecture. Just a human being moving through the darkness, saying with their feet what the entire South refused to hear with its ears. This is wrong, and I am not going to accept it. The Civil War began in 1861. By 1865, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. 246 years of chains, gone. And it didn't end just because armies marched or politicians voted. It ended because people refused to stay. Decade after decade, they kept running, kept digging under fences, kept forging passes, kept mailing themselves in wooden crates, kept stealing warships, kept walking north by starlight. You can cage a body. You cannot cage a decision. Colonel Whitmore's fence stood for 30 years. Wood rotted, iron rusted. Nobody repaired it. Nothing left but post holes and an embarrassing family story. The 14 people who went under it, they built lives, built families, built futures. Some came back after the war to build them right there in Mississippi, on the same land where that fence once stood. Turns out, 12 feet of pine and iron is no match for a person who has decided to be free. It never was,